In this video, we're going to look at pain, at suffering, and also at the end examine the illusion, both the reality, the depth of, but in the end, the illusion of pain and suffering. So pain is at the seed or at the heart of what we might consider negativity. Pain always comes before fear. Fear is fear of pain. So without pain, there's no fear of pain repeating itself in the future. So let's look at this core of pain. And first of all, what is pain? Pain is the distance between what we long for, what we need, and the reality we experience. I want this, I long for this, I need this, but I don't have it. That's pain. Physical pain, emotional pain, financial pain, relational pain, sexual pain. I want this, I long for it, I need it. You know, you close up your nose, your body needs oxygen, your body starts to feel pain. When the pain doesn't subside, you start to feel afraid of even more pain in the coming moments. So you have pain as the seed, the core, and then you have fear of pain emerging when we fail to demonstrate the competency to respond, because nobody wants to feel pain. Everyone wants to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse. It's a basic human drive. So we have pain, and there are levels and intensity of pain. Now, we start off positively oriented, curious, beautiful, engaged, adventurous. We want to go out and connect with the world. But as we experience pain, physical, emotional, mental pain, the pain threshold, the pain level in our system, in our physical and in our psychological bodies, rises. Now, at a certain point in that rising, as pain escalates, as pain increases, we flip from pain and avoiding pain being a sideline motivation to pain becoming the primary motivator, as in avoiding pain. Meaning, as the continuum of pain climbs, there is a point at which every human being will do everything they can to stop the pain. Anything, just don't give me more of this pain. So this is one of the most significant occurrences in psychology. This is the point at which we stop moving towards what we most desire and start moving away from anticipated pain. So this in and of itself produces more pain. And one of the interesting phenomena, the painful phenomena of pain, is that pain leads to more pain, which leads to more pain. As we experience increases in pain and reach a threshold of intolerance, of where the pain is undigestible, we pivot from aspiring to beauty, truth, and goodness in our own version of that. Everyone seeks the ideal in their own way, in their own form. For some, the ideal is sexual, for some it's financial, for some it's this amount and this amount. But we are all in pursuit of the ideal until pain reaches a threshold that is so intolerable that the primary drive switches from pursue what is beautiful, good, and true to avoiding more pain in the future, as well as the present. Now that flip is the flip from a positive motivation to a negative motivation. I don't want to feel that way again, is a negative emotion. Before it was, I want this, I want that, I'd like to explore this, I'd like to explore that. But once the flip occurs, usually in childhood, the flip occurs. Once the flip occurs in a traumatic culture, then it's, I want this, but not if it will expose me to that amount of pain. I'd like to be in a relationship with you, but not if it's going to make me feel that way. And so it becomes a conditional thing. I want this, I want this. Maybe it's even too risky to acknowledge my desire, because what if my desire exposes me to a reality in which I re-experience my worst nightmare? The pain at that level where it flipped, and I became negatively motivated to avoid feeling that way again. So, what are the amplifiers? How does pain grow? What makes pain feel bigger? And there are a number of cofactors, and they could be called continuums. So, up here, we have powerless. When you're in pain and you're powerless, meaning you don't have the power to stop the pain, your ability to tolerate the pain goes down. Your reactivity to the pain goes up. They've done experiments where people are given an electric shock or a loud noise that is irritating. It's unbearable when people are out of control. But if they give people a button and say, if you absolutely can't stand this, just press the button and it'll stop. What happens is people's ability to tolerate the pain goes up. Why? Because they've got power. So power is the counterpoint to powerlessness. We can double our tolerance for pain, or we can handle pain that's twice as intense if we simply give ourselves the power at any moment to stop it. Now, the next point on the continuum of pain is the continuum of isolation versus togetherness. When we are isolated, when we are alone, it's much harder to deal with pain, particularly traumatic pain. Traumatic pain is that pain which shatters our identity, which ruptures the known, leaves us in the unknown. And out of the ashes, we must reinvent ourselves, must create a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that relates to the new reality. Because the old pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being has been broken. When we are alone in that process, it is hundreds of % harder than when we bear the trauma, bear the burden of that pain together. The next facet that amplifies or mitigates pain is the shame-blame continuum on the one hand and the innocence on the other. So when something painful occurs and everyone around us says, you idiot, it's all your fault. You're an idiot. It doesn't have anything to do with us. There's the isolation of judgment and of shame. And you really deserve the pain, the shame, because it's your fault. You should have known that bears attack people. You shouldn't have gone out in that, at that time of year. You should have done this. You should have done that. So when there's pain or shame and blame, the pain is much louder and harder to endure than if there is innocence, i.e., road accidents happen. Bears attack people from time to time. It's not your fault. This is life. And we're not going to persecute you because you're in pain. So this is the innocence of pain. It could have happened to anyone. Now, when Viktor Frankl talked about this in Man's Search for Meaning, that a human being can endure any what if there is a compelling enough why. If you're a firefighter and you run into a burning building because you understand there's a 6-year-old little girl, you see her up in the window, and you're not going to let that little girl burn. That's called meaning, significance. You are significant. Your heroism is going to save an innocent girl's life. And you are going to risk your life in order to do it. Now you go through the front door, you're hit with a wave of white-hot heat. You put your helmet down, you charge forward, because as hot as those flames are, you know that that little girl is going to feel those flames in a few minutes if you don't do something. And so you go through the flame, you go through the heat, you find the little girl, you wrap her in a fireproof blanket, you get out of the building, and you have sustained third-degree burns. Your hand is going to take some serious skin surgery, and you are in 9 out of 10 pain. But the pain has meaning. It has significance. That pain is what you were willing to risk in order to do something important to your values, your character. So, on the dark side, pain is much more intense. If you do that same thing, you go into the building because your brother, who's jealous of your wife, who's jealous of your success, your brother hates you. And you go into the building because your brother says there's a little girl there. And you come out and you're burned. But the meaning of that burn is that your brother is untrustworthy. You shouldn't have listened to him. It was for nothing. It was just for a petty person's revenge. It's going to hurt a lot more because you've got emotional pain. You've got the pain of distrusting people added to the pain of the physical wound, or it's just senseless violence, or You know, your commander wouldn't spend the money on body armor. So you're in pain so that the military could save a few $100s on body armor. The meaning is disgusting, right? And so whether something has meaninglessness or meaning determines a big part of the pain. And in some cases, if you didn't go into the burning building to rescue that little girl, and thus did not sustain the wound, and that little girl died because of your cowardice to face the flame, that pain is sometimes worse than the burn you would have experienced. And so meaning or meaninglessness is a very important variable in that continuum. Now, another important variable in pain is sanity. So on the left hand, we have insane. On the right hand, we have sane. Now, this is critically important, in part because sanity gives us a sense of certainty. Sanity is ultimately a technology for predicting the future, for feeling certain. A sense of certainty is created by sanity. When we're insane, when we say 2 + 2 = 3,608, it equals 3,608 in one moment, and the next moment it equals 209. The next moment it equals -1. It's insane. There's no pattern. You lose meaning when you lose sanity. You cannot have meaning in the context of insanity. But you also, nothing has any predictability. The markets are crazy. People are acting crazy. They're not making sense. The people that said they wanted this are now doing the opposite. It's not making any sense. When you lose sanity, you lose groundedness in sanity. You become insane. And it's harder to deal with pain when you have no sense of context, because sanity gives you a little bit of perspective. Yes, 2 + 2 does equal 4. But if we want to get to 5, we know we just need to add 1. So we have 2 + 2 = 4. 1 more would equal 5. We want to get to 5, so we got to focus. We've got a path of action. When you're in pain, and the world is insane, or you have gone insane because you're unwilling to deal with the level of pain in reality, the pain gets bigger because you're now exposed to the unknown, to the chaos of the unknown. And we want a certain amount of order and predictability. And so to be insane and in pain and lose order and predictability means that that pain escalates. It feels bigger. We've got a new source of pain, the lack of order and meaning. Now, similar to that, and on a similar parallel thread, when the pain is unknown, I'm in massive amounts of pain, and I don't know why. I don't understand it. My life is good. I got a raise, and I'm depressed. I don't want to move. I don't want to talk. I'm in pain. But I shouldn't be in pain. I feel insane. I don't know why. Right? So I can't put meaning to it. So when there's an unknown pain, a grief just keeps coming up, and I don't understand it. It's bigger. It brings about dread or fear. fear of the unknown, one of the most core fundamental fears of a traumatized culture is the fear of the unknown. Now, the unknown is neutral, which is why it is a traumatized culture that has as its deepest fear the unknown. Because within the unknown lies the probability, the possibility of experiencing and re-experiencing our deepest trauma, our deepest pain. It's out there in the unknown. Now, also in the unknown is our deepest joy, our deepest hopes, our deepest imaginations. Those are also out there in the unknown. It's just that when we are predisposed, when we have a body memory of trauma or PTSD, the unknown represents to those negatively biased, i.e., I'll do anything to avoid that pain again, then you have to stay out of the unknown because the unknown can contain that pain. Otherwise, you look at the unknown, and if you're positively disposed, you think maybe $1 million will pop out of the unknown. Maybe a beautiful lover ready to have sex will just jump out of the unknown. Let's see what's in there. But to those committed to a bottom line, I do not want to feel that way again. The unknown is the most terrifying thing imaginable. And so to a traumatized culture such as our own, the fear of the unknown is worse than almost anything. Now, if we continue this polarity, the next thing is dependency. The dependency continuum. Now, on the far extreme, we have complete and utter dependency. And on the other hand, we have complete independency. Now, an infant, a child, is completely dependent. And this is why many of the traumas that an infant experiences become life-defining. You know, that point at which we switch from a positive to a negative bias as our core motivation. So when we are dependent and in pain, particularly if that pain is caused by a parent, by a teacher, by a government that we depend on, by a spouse that we depend on, it escalates the pain. Now, if we are independent, our spouse hurt us, but we have independent access to self-love. We have independent access to loving friends. We have independent access to money. We have independent access to freedom and meeting our human needs. There's other people we're sexually attracted to and interested in who are interested in us. And our partner betrays us. We're not in a dependent state. It's like, okay, you don't respect me enough to do what you said, and just, okay, I get it. People have been doing that for centuries. But you go off and do your thing, and I will meet my needs elsewhere. It's a completely different experience. Maybe your partner's even annoying and you were even considering, it's like you don't need the relationship. There's other more interesting people, and good, they've gone ahead and given you an easy excuse out of the relationship. Wonderful. You're not dependent on them. It's painful that they lied. It's painful that they betrayed, but it's not a big deal. The way it is if you depend on them financially. The way it is if you believe you're unlovable and they're the only people who love you. The way you are dependent if you do not love yourself and feel you need someone else to love you and now they are betraying you. That's a completely different experience of betrayal. The next point is it traumatic or is it digestible? Now, what are we talking about here? Over here, we have our identity. And our identity is a synergy of 5 patterns. We have our pattern of thinking, our pattern of speaking, which follows our pattern of thinking, our pattern of feeling, which follows our pattern of thinking, our pattern of doing, which follows our pattern of thinking, and our pattern of being, our physical form, the way we talk, etc. These are our patterns. So this is our identity. We look in the mirror, and how do we know it's us? Well, we remember. We put together yesterday and the day before. We remember. We look, scan the tapes, and we say, I saw that same face in the mirror yesterday. That was being that way. Skin was similarly colored, nose similar shape. So the being matches. It's a pattern. The nose looked like that yesterday. It looks like that today, and it looked like that the way a few weeks ago. That's my being there in the mirror. That's me. How do I recognize it? Because it's a repeat of a former pattern. Now I look inside my mind. Oh, Mom's calling again. Oh, well, is that me? Of course it's me. Every time Mom calls, I have the same thought. It's a pattern. Mom calls, I think, oh, what do I have to do? It's a pattern. I recognize the pattern because I've thought it many times before. That's definitely me who's thinking that thought, because I'm thinking it now, I thought it before. Same with the feelings. I see so-and-so. I always feel so-and-so when I see so-and-so. So that's me. A repeated pattern, a default mode, and that's an identity. I think this, I feel this, I say this, I do this, and I'm like this. That's me. Now, every identity is a pattern. Now, when small energies intersect with this pattern, they can be digested. And the identity holds its integrity. The pattern stays coherent. But when very large amplitude phenomena intersect with our identity, we cannot maintain the coherence of the original pattern. The intensity and amplitude of the energy that is colliding with our identity, the patterns we identify with, are too intense and too big to stay coherent. Now what happens? We lose our pattern. The pattern breaks. We no longer recognize, put ourselves back together again. We look in the mirror and that's not me. We look in our that's not the things that I think. The pattern changes. We lose our identity. Now, in a traumatic culture, this is devastating because we are now a different person. We have a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in a new environment that includes massive energy amplitudes that are out of our control. We are in a dissociative state of shock in which we do not recognize ourself or the reality that produced the trauma, that shattered the coherence of our original pattern and identity. And we are now face to face with the unknown, understanding that at any moment, out of our control, we may come exposed to our worst fear, our worst nightmare, our dread, our terror, our pain. And that is too much to deal with, particularly when we feel powerless to stop it and when we are alone. This is overwhelming pain. Now, on the other side of the continuum, we have digestible pain. Those are those little squiggles that come along and we say, it's a disruption, messed up my routine for a day, but I can deal with that. I can deal with that. So self-confidence is essential medicine for dealing with trauma. And everyone has different degrees of confidence. Some people will collapse if somebody looks at them because they don't know how to deal with that. Other people can have their bank account wiped out, their spouse can leave them, they can get arrested for a crime they didn't commit, and their assets can be seized. But they have confidence that they can deal with it. I may have to spend some time in jail. I may have to convince an attorney my innocence. I'm obviously going to have to find a new partner if I want to be in a romantic relationship. I may have to re-earn investor trust and recoup my money, but take me 5 years, 7 years, I can do it. It's not shattering my identity. For someone else, just a look. Oh, I don't know how to respond. It's too much. It's devastating, right? It's about how confident we are. And a lot of that comes from experience. The more times we've picked ourselves up and consciously gone through the process, the more we say, okay, it's a setback, but I'll deal with it. So that's digestible pain versus traumatic pain. Now, another thing, and this ties in somewhat to trauma, is it timeless or is it predictable? This ties into control as well. Trauma tends to, when we shatter identity, we lose the ability to measure and have perspective. We enter a timeless region of the brain, and it feels endless, it feels eternal. Even small amounts of pain that have, it's not a big deal that somebody, ran off with your wife. I mean, sure, it's a big deal, but it's not the end of the world. But if it knocks you into that timeless space where it just feels like this is just going to go on forever, it feels horrible and it's never going to stop, then that amplifies significantly, exponentially, the amount of pain that a given event feels, versus saying, okay, it's going to take me 18 months to vent my feelings, restructure my life, find a new partner that I can trust and like, and I'm going to have to allocate 2 or 3 hours a day on that project, but that's what we're going to do. It's an 18-month window that's going to decrease each month, and I can get through that. So is it timeless? Is it predictable and within a time frame? This is really key to determining if something feels traumatic or not. Now, in the same way, is it specific or is it global? This is another angle on that same aspect. When one thing happens, somebody took your parking place. You indicated, you got there, you waited for 5-10 minutes, you're just about to go in and someone took your parking place. That's specific. It's irritating, it's rude, you may do whatever you do about that, but it's specific. Now, imagine the same thing that's happening with, first you had an audit at an awkward time. You were going to go on vacation. Now you've got an IRS audit. And they didn't say, when's a good time for you? They didn't say, you've been saving up for this vacation, you've got to have a break. No. They want to do the audit when you're planning on going on vacation. And it's going to tie you up for your whole vacation. Because they're not going to make it easy for you. They're going to say, well, we'll do this, and then we'll see this, and we'll call you, right? So you got an IRS audit. Your kid is stealing from you. A key client cancels the job. You went to get the other one that was waiting, and then they also lost interest. Then your car broke down. And the bill seemed high. And then the parking space. And you say, wait a fucking minute. The world is out to get me. Everything is going wrong. I can't even keep track, and I don't want to take another fucking step forward because I feel like a joke, right? Why is everyone ganging up on me? Why now? Why me, right? When it becomes global, everything's going wrong, it becomes exponentially more painful. Little things that normally wouldn't have bothered become more painful when they're global. Next, we have hopeless and hope. So when we look at the pain that we're in, take a look, okay? This could go right, that could go right. There's a client we're talking to over there. There's another one we're talking, one of them may well work out. We've got difficult finances for the next few months, but we've got hope. It's painful, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. Versus being in the printing business as the digital age dawns, being high in debt, and nobody will give you a bank loan for a dying industry. You're in printing, you're in deep, you've got all your money invested. And it's just, now the rent is raised, now this. It feels hopeless. It's hopeless, right? If you decide as you look at the future that the path that you're on is hopeless and you don't know how to change the path, the pain becomes unbearable. Versus, I look at it, I can deal with that. There's hope. So these are the kind of the variables, the continuums that determine how much pain you're in. But also, very importantly, they determine how painful a given event is or feels. So a very small event could tip you into global if it comes on the heels of 5 or 6 major events and you just snap. It's about each of these continuums working in conjunction with all of the other continuums. They're all working at the same time. Now, the more you're on the left side of this column, powerless, alone, shame-based, meaningless, insane, you don't know what's going on, it's all in the unknown, you're in a dependent state, you're traumatized, it feels timeless, it's repeated versus a singular event, that's another kind of thing. If a pain, an irritant, they take your stapler and they took it again, and then they took it again, and then they pretended like nothing's happened. It's like, if it's a repeated versus a singular event, if it's global rather than just one thing, if you're hopeless, if all those things are going together, the tiniest little thing can set you off more than a major thing, a death in the family, a near-death experience, having your car totaled in a car accident that nearly killed you. You can walk away just fine from that. If you feel powerful, you feel supported and together, you have a sense of innocence, nobody blamed you. It was the guy behind you that didn't brake fast enough. You have a sense of meaning, and this has meaning for you as well. It reminds you of how important your family is. You feel sane. You're dealing with known terrain. Car accidents are understood. It's not a visit from a UFO or something. You feel independent. You feel you can digest and deal with it. You've got enough money to pay the insurance and buy a new car. It's going to last a short time, quick trip to the dealership. It's a singular event. It's not a global issue, and you've got hope. Near-death experience, car totaled, can lead to gratitude and moving forward with more vigor than before. A look, someone glaring at you and making a negative comment can send you over the edge if you feel powerless or alone or ashamed or what's the meaning of life? You feel on the edge of going crazy. I thought I looked good, but I put on my nicest clothes and I feel insane. I don't know what's going on. And so these are the variables. Now there is within these variables a point at which one's life is primarily negative in general, meaning I'm trying to push pain, fear, and shame away. I'm buying this thing because I think it makes me look more normal and I feel less shameful than if I don't have it. I'm buying the cool thing. I'm following the advertisers. I'm doing this. I'm doing this. In the moment, you can also switch to the point where in the moment you will do absolutely anything to avoid pain. So pain is the separation from and the longing for what we most desire. If we don't care about it, don't need it, don't desire it, and we're separate from it, it's good riddance. So pain is the separation from and the longing for what we most value, what we most desire. I want to be loved, and I don't feel that anyone loves me, including myself. That's pain. I want to be able to move my body, but my broken arms, my age, etc., I can barely get out of bed. That's pain. I want to be able to give my children a good life, but I'm deeper in debt every month. That's pain. Separation from and longing for. These are cofactors that amplify or minimize. Now, within the framework of human consciousness, we're talking about experiences that have been felt by human beings, by identities for ever since there were human beings. There's the one being left behind, the unwanted child, the poor being exploited by the rich being robbed or betrayed by the poor. There's pain. I want this, I want this. There's a gap between those two desires, and that gap is filled with pain. As the pain reaches a higher and higher threshold, I become terrified of feeling the pain because it's so painful. Now I'm afraid of my own fear. I'm running like a headless chicken, just trying to get through the day and avoid pain. So this is all real within the lens of identity. This is me, an isolated individual in my cult, looking out at the world that isn't the way I want it to be. I want this, but instead there is this. There is pain in the gap between the ego's desire, the self's desire, and the reality that is. Now, why and how is this pain an illusion? Because I said at the beginning that on the one hand, this pain is real, and we're talking about the most miserable experiences you can possibly imagine. That people have committed suicide to avoid feeling this level of pain. It is an illusion because all energy is connected. Now, I'm not suggesting that you dismiss it because you're in pain. I suggest you respond to the pain. But it's also important to understand that ultimately, the separation from is an illusion. The longing for is real, but the separation from is an illusion. All energy is interconnected. All particles are innately connected to their ecology. So the pain comes from the identity. The pattern of thinking is what produces the pain. You look at a rich person, you say, I want that. The pain comes from thinking they're separate from you and they're better than you. There's no pain otherwise. The pain comes from thinking that death is a failure, that death is a bad thing. There's no pain otherwise. There's just a tremendous explosion of possibility and probability as different energy patterns that are all interconnected turn from one thing into another on an evolutionary path. It's happening all around us. It's life. And it happens whether or not our ego, our identity, the pattern of thinking that we identify with and that produces the feelings that are so painful or not, you see, when you let go of the I identity, that this is my pattern and that's the other, which obviously the I identity cannot do. But ultimately, the I identity dissolves. The energy and the formation of that energy remains. No energy is created or destroyed, our physicists will tell us. It only changes from one form to another. So plants, fruits, avocados have transformed into my body. And as my body gets buried in the ground, my body will turn back into fruits and avocados, into grasses, into trees that turn the energy that's in my body back into the ecology out of which it emerged. Now, the ego is terrified of the unknown because of a pattern of thinking, because of a fear of no longer existing, because of an idea that death is bad. So the ego will resist and feel pain. But the avocado that becomes my body doesn't feel pain. It just goes from being an avocado to a part of my body, and then back out through my feces to become a new avocado, fertilizer for another tree. It's a cycle. It's a breath. Now, the ego is caught in the middle, afraid, not knowing where it came from as it's breathed into being, not knowing where it's going as it exhales back into the ecology that gave birth to it. The pain is real to the ego, to the identity, but it's not real. Energy is moving about in great excitement, in great exuberance. Whether we want it to or not, whether we think it should or not, the pain is manufactured in the conscious mind of the identity that chooses to see this way, to see that way, to believe this. Oh my gosh, it's such a tragedy that Jenny died. She was only 11. That's a thought. Tragedy. What's tragedy? Bad. What are you supposed to feel when bad? You feel bad, you pain. That's horrible. I wanted to get to know Jenny, and then she disappeared. Jenny is gone. See, these are thoughts. Jenny is not gone. There's new life emerging. The identity in some form may continue. Maybe Jenny is playing around in an astral body. Maybe the energy and the atoms are excited about being an avocado tree. It's the thoughts that say, this is good, this is bad. And it's very important to understand the impact of polarity in thinking, because it represents the fall from grace in most of our mythologies. We have the one, the interconnected whole. There's no language. But then we descend in from the garden of ecology into the duality of the knowledge, the language of good and evil. Now, when you cut the one in half, which is what you do when you overlay a polarity, you create two equal halves. You don't cut something in half, but one half is bigger than the other half. That's not a half. That's not a polarity. When you take the one and divide it into two, you get two equal halves. Now, the descent from the garden into the knowledge of good and evil is the descent from ecological thinking and ecological consciousness into good and bad, up and down, right and wrong, as created by the conscious mind of the observer that invents the polarity and then looks through that polarity. Now, why is this a fall from grace? Well, you now have half of reality as your friend and half of your reality as an enemy, because you divided the world, the universe, into two, and this half is good and this half is bad. You now have a tug of war between half of all that is and all that you are and everything else. You exist in a tug of war. And so that's a difficult life. You've gone from the wheel, the one, the garden, the grace, into the duality of right and wrong. Try driving a car with a wheel that looks like that. It's a bumpy ride. It's not graceful. The graceful is the interconnected whole. The in-breath and the out-breath. The circle, the sphere. It's the most graceful shape known to the mind. It's elegant, it's balanced, it's centered. But polarity creates extremism. The more extreme you get, the more farther you go from the center. It takes more and more energy. If you try and hold a pole on your finger, you balance a 10-foot pole, it's pretty easy if you do it totally vertically, right? But as soon as that pole starts leaning out, over here, you got to spend more and more energy to hold it up. The more unbalanced you get, the more energy you have to expend. More energy is consumed. When you cut something in half, it's a bumpy ride. And you create a war between half of the world and the other half, between half of yourself and the other half. That's how we descend from the garden. That's how we create pain. Through the knowledge of good and evil and the loss of the one, the loss of the ecology. And having gone through more and more splintering and fragmentation of the psyche, broken the one into infinitely smaller and smaller parts. What we're gradually doing is moving towards the reassembly of the one through the masculine lens of dots, of particles and lines. Because when a computer recreates a sphere, it doesn't do so by here's a sphere. That's the one before the computer. The computer recreates the sphere by drawing a series of planes. And the sphere emerges out of those lines. When a crystal carver carves a crystal, they take an angular shape. They cut off the points, and they just keep running it through the saw until it starts to look somewhat round. And then they start polishing. Similarly, a computer may create a sphere by dots. All these dots, and slowly the sphere emerges after millions upon millions of dots. And then the eye starts to see the one out of the dots. That's how we're returning to the garden that we descended from with language. We're returning, we're healing pain slowly. We're still creating it by cutting everything into more and more bits that we pretend are separate from one another. We pretend that we're separate from ourselves. We pretend that we're separate from others. We pretend we're separate from the earth. Every time we create the illusion of separation from language, with language, what we long for and pretend that we're separate from seems farther away. So we're more in pain. And yet, as we reconnect the dots and the relationships in ecological thinking, we start understanding that this hand is not separate from anything. We call it a hand through the delusion of language. But this is not a hand. This hand does not exist without the body that gives birth to it. But this is not a body. This body does not exist without the grandparents and grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents all the way back to the monkeys. But the monkeys do not exist. That's a word. They're interconnected with the crocodiles that decided to walk out on the land. And the crocodiles are not separate from the planet that gave birth to them. And the planet is not a planet, as seen through the delusion of language. It is a part of a great cosmos playing its role. The galaxy is not a separate galaxy. It is one face and one part of the universe. And the universe is not disconnected. It all emerged in the time-space continuum out of something less than the size of a pea. There's that much distance between us. Everyone. The worst enemy, just words. The best friend, other words. All emerged from the same program, from the same space. It all started out as helium and hydrogen. Everyone you love, everyone you hate, all has the same roots in an interconnected whole. So where's the pain, if not in your mind? The journey out of pain is the journey out of the prism and the prison of language, which defines all conscious thought. You cannot think a single thought without words. Try it. Try it right now. Think a thought, any thought at all, without words. You find that your thoughts follow the groove of your verbal norms. Your consciousness is directed by the habit of language. And if that habit is producing more and more pain, you must learn to use different words that reconstruct the one that we've never left. Because our consciousness has diverged from the garden, from the ecology, for thousands of years, but not the reality. The pain is an illusion. You and I are as connected as we ever were in that moment of the Big Bang. Our minds have gotten lost in the words. Our worst enemy, our best friend, are both deluded with language, as we are perceiving two faces of the possibility field through words that are creating deeper and deeper pain. It's not necessarily useful to a conscious mind, to an ego, to look at it like this. Byron Katie does her best to untangle the meanings by casting doubt. Can you be sure that your words are truly true? Because all words are symbols, crude symbols of a vaster landscape, of a vaster ecology of interconnectedness. And that which we judge creates the delusion of separation between us and what we judge. But it's not real. It may freeze our consciousness, it may dissociate our consciousness, but not the innate interconnectedness of all things. To live in the knowledge of good and evil as diverse consciousness and creatures is to live in a world where everyone thinks they're good and that what is most different from them is evil and is at war with itself and at war with each other. That all disappears when the paper-thin illusion of language dissolves and the interconnected ecology out of which we all come and will all return represents itself through new eyes that have been healed of the many thousand cuts of separation that all words are. Hi, I'm Dane Rose. All knowledge begins with a paradigm, and out of that paradigm comes an idea, an awareness that we adopt, reject, or synthesize into something better. It doesn't become wisdom, it doesn't become useful until we take action, until we integrate it into not only our thoughts, but our feelings, our body, our words, and our way of being. For that to occur, we have to move from the passive media paradigm into more active engagement. In the link below, in the More Information section, is an invitation to join a very small, deliberately filtered, high-quality discussion with a group of people who share a common language and want to work with these ideas, with me and with one another, with the sole goal of creating 10 times more sustainable well-being for ourselves and those around us per unit of energy invested. Thank you for watching.